On a serene lake in upstate New York, where the morning mist still clings to the water, a lesson in mistaken identity is about to unfold. When the notorious Death Riders motorcycle gang rolls into Cedar Lake, they see what looks like an easy target. A middle-aged man teaching his 10-year-old son how to fish. What they don't realize is that Michael Stone isn't just another weekend dad trying to make memories. For the past 15 years, he's been the police's most successful deep-cover operative, infiltrating and dismantling some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country. His specialty? Making bad men disappear without leaving a trace. This isn't just another story about bikers picking the wrong fight. This is about how a group of criminals learned that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that looks like prey. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The early morning sun painted gentle ripples across Cedar Lake's surface as Michael Stone watched his son Tommy adjust his grip on the fishing rod. The boy's tongue poked out slightly from the corner of his mouth, a gesture so reminiscent of his mother that it made Michael's heart ache. Sarah had done the same thing whenever she concentrated, whether she was reading case files or attempting to cook one of her infamous experimental dinners. Like this, Dad? Tommy asked, his small hands positioned exactly where Michael had shown him. The pride in the boy's voice made Michael smile, pushing away the shadows of memory that threatened to darken the moment. Perfect, buddy. Now remember, when you cast, it's all in the wrist, like we practiced in the backyard. Michael demonstrated the motion again, his own rod moving in a smooth arc. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and lake. Water, so different from the urban jungle where he spent most of his working hours. 5 years had passed since Sarah's death, since that undercover operation had gone sideways in ways that still haunted his dreams. She'd been more than his wife. She'd been his partner on the force, his anchor in the stormy seas of deep cover work. They'd promised each other that their dangerous careers wouldn't affect their family life, that Tommy would have a normal childhood despite having 2 undercover. Cops for parents. Now, watching Tommy's face light up as his line cut through the air in a perfect cast, Michael felt the familiar guilt gnawing at his conscience. After Sarah's death, he'd promised himself he'd step back from the most dangerous assignments, focus on being there for their son. Yet the department still called, and the skills he'd honed over 15 years of undercover work were too valuable to let rust completely. Dad, look! Tommy's excited voice snapped Michael back to the present. The boy's rod was bent, line cutting through the water. I think I got something. Michael moved behind his son, hands hovering near Tommy's shoulders, ready to help, but letting the boy handle it himself. Easy now. Remember what we talked about. Don't try to horse it in. Tommy nodded, his face set in concentration as he worked the reel. The morning light caught the spray of water as something broke the surface, glittering like diamonds. A smallmouth bass, decent size for the lake, thrashed at the end of the line. Stay calm. You've got this, Michael encouraged, watching Tommy. Apply the techniques they'd practiced. The boy adjusted his stance, compensating for the fish's weight, just as Michael had taught him. In moments like these, he saw Sarah in every movement, every determined set of their son's jaw. The fish finally tired, and Tommy successfully reeled it to the small dock where they stood. Michael helped him net it, both of them grinning at the achievement. That's a good one, buddy. Your first real catch. He ruffled Tommy's hair, heart swelling at the pure joy in his son's eyes. Can we take a picture to show Ms. Rodriguez at school? Tommy asked, carefully holding up his prize. She said we could share our weekend adventures on Monday. Michael pulled out his phone, capturing the moment, Tommy beaming, holding up his catch with the misty lake behind him. These were the moments Sarah had made him promise not to miss, the ones that mattered most. The fish wasn't huge by any standard, but the way Tommy looked at it, you'd think he'd landed a world record. As they released the base back into the lake, Michael noticed the first distant rumble of motorcycles echoing across the water. The sound was still far off, probably, from the main road that wound through town, but it triggered the instincts he'd developed over years of undercover work. Something about the rhythm of those engines, the aggressive growl rather than the casual purr of weekend riders, set off warning bells in his mind. Tommy didn't seem to notice, already casting his line again, eager for another catch. Michael forced himself to relax, to focus on his son rather than the approaching sounds. This was their time, their peaceful morning by the lake, yet he couldn't quite silence the part of his brain that catalogued details, that noticed the way other early morning fishermen were looking up at the sound, their faces showing the concern of locals who knew trouble when they heard it. "Hey, Dad," Tommy said, breaking into his thoughts again, "do you think Mom would be proud of my fish?" Michael swallowed hard, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders. "She'd be more than proud, buddy. She'd be taking about 100 more pictures and probably planning a special fish-themed dinner to celebrate." Tommy laughed, the sound pure and clean against the growing rumble in the distance. "Yeah, and it would probably be really weird, like that time she put gummy bears in the spaghetti." "That's exactly what she'd do," Michael agreed, holding on to the moment even as his trained senses tracked the approaching sounds. For now, this dock was their world, this moment their reality. Everything else could wait. The bell above Martha's diner door chimed, but it wasn't the cheerful sound it usually made. Something about the way it rang, sharp, aggressive, matched the heavy boots that crossed the threshold. 6 men entered, leather-clad and battle-scarred, their cuts displaying the snarling wolf patch of the Death Rider's MC. Behind the counter, Martha Jensen's weathered hands paused mid-wipe, her dish towel frozen against a coffee mug. She'd owned this diner for 30 years, served everyone from summer tourists to local troublemakers. But these men were different. Their very presence seemed to suck the warmth from her usually cozy establishment. Coffee, black. 6 cups, the leader growled, not so much ordering as commanding. He wore a president's patch, his leather vest telling stories of chapters across. 3 states. The name patch read Razor, though Martha doubted that was what his mother had called him. From his spot at the lake, Michael could see the row of motorcycles parked outside the diner. He'd moved Tommy to a quieter spot around the bend, using the excuse of following the fish, but kept the diner in his line of sight. Through the large windows, he watched the scene unfold, reading the body language of everyone inside like a book he'd memorized. "Looks like they're getting busier at Martha's," Tommy observed, still focused on his fishing. "Maybe we should get breakfast there after?" "Maybe another day, buddy," Michael replied, noting how the other customers were finding reasons to leave, dropping cash on their tables and making quick exits. He recognized the tactics: establish dominance, create fear, make it clear who's in charge. He'd seen it dozens of times undercover, had even participated in similar scenes while maintaining his covers. Inside the diner, Razor's boys spread out, claiming tables like they were marking territory. Martha served their coffee with practiced efficiency, her face a mask of professional neutrality, but Michael could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand trembled slightly as she set down each cup. "Nice place you got here," Razor commented, his voice carrying that false friendliness that preceded trouble. "Real homey." "Thank you," Martha replied curtly, already turning away. "Shame if anything happened to it." The words hung in the air, like smoke, heavy and toxic. Martha's steps faltered for just a moment, but she kept moving, disappearing into the kitchen where her son Billy, the cook, was watching through the service window with growing anger. Sheriff Dave Cooper chose that moment to enter, the timing too perfect to be coincidental. He'd likely been watching from his office across the street. Dave was old-school law enforcement, more comfortable with handshakes than handcuffs, but his eyes were sharp as they swept across the scene. "Morning, Martha," he called out purposefully, ignoring the bikers as he took his usual spot at the counter. The usual pleas. Michael watched the subtle power play unfold. Dave was establishing his presence, making it clear this was his town. The bikers, for their part, seemed more amused than intimidated. Razor especially wore a smirk that suggested he'd dealt with small-town sheriffs before. Fresh faces in town. Dave commented to no one in particular, his voice carrying. "Just passing through, I expect." Razor turned in his seat, taking his time to respond. "Heard Cedar Lake was nice this time of year. Thought we'd stay a while, get to know the locals." His eyes flicked to Martha, then back to Dave. "Real friendly. Good town you got here." The threat was clear, wrapped in a veneer of civility. Michael recognized the dance, the establishing of boundaries, the testing of limits. He'd seen it play out in criminal organizations across the country. Usually it ended one of two ways. Either the locals backed down and paid for protection, or things got ugly. Through the window, Michael caught Dave's eye for just a moment. The sheriff knew who he was, one of the few who did. They'd worked together on a case 3 years back, something involving gun runners using the lake as a transit point. That case had ended quietly, the perpetrators simply disappearing one night, their operation dismantled without a single shot fired. "Tommy," Michael said softly, "let's pack up for now. We can come back this evening when the fish are biting better." "Oh, Dad." Tommy started to protest, but something in Michael's voice must have registered because he began reeling in his line without further complaint. As they packed their gear, Michael counted motorcycles, memorized faces through the diner window, and noted the patches that told stories of allegiances and earned status. His mind was already spinning contingencies, calculating angles, preparing for what he hoped wouldn't be necessary. But watching Razor's boys laugh as an elderly couple hurried past their bikes, seeing Martha's hands shake as she served their coffee, Michael knew better. Sometimes trouble didn't just come looking. It kicked down your door and made itself at home. By late afternoon, Cedar Lake's main street had transformed. The usual lazy pace of the small town had given way to an undercurrent of tension, punctuated by the intermittent roar of motorcycles. Michael watched from his truck in the lake's parking lot as Tommy dozed in the passenger seat, their afternoon of fishing cut short by the growing unease in the air. The Death Riders had wasted no time marking their territory. Outside the liquor store, 2 members were helping the owner unload his delivery, cases of premium liquor disappearing into their saddlebags without payment. The owner, Mr. Chen, said nothing, his face a mask of forced calm. Michael had bought bait from his shop for years, knew he had 2 kids in college. Now he watched as the man's hard work was casually stripped away. At the gas station, 3 more bikers had set up an informal toll booth, demanding protection fees from anyone filling up their tanks. The station's teenage attendant, Katie, looked terrified as she handed over the day's earnings. Her father had served with Michael on the force years ago, before taking a bullet that put him in a wheelchair. Michael's hand tightened on the steering wheel as he observed it all. His trained, eye-catching details others might miss. The way the bikers coordinated their movements suggested military background, probably dishonorably discharged given their current activities. Their patches told stories of other chapters, other towns they'd terrorized. This wasn't random intimidation, it was a calculated takeover. "Dad," Tommy stirred beside him, rubbing his eyes. "Can we go back to fishing now?" "Not just yet, buddy." Michael forced a smile. "How about ice cream instead? We earned it after that big catch this morning." As they walked toward the ice cream parlor, Michael noted how other parents were hurrying their children inside, doors locking behind them. The Death Riders had positioned themselves strategically around town, always in sight, always a reminder of their presence. It was classic intimidation tactics, something he'd seen criminal organizations use countless times. The ice cream parlor's bell chimed as they entered, and Michael immediately tensed. 2 bikers occupied a corner booth, their leather cuts marking them as Death Riders prospects, newcomers eager to prove themselves. They watched Michael and Tommy with predatory interest that made his skin crawl. 2 scoops of chocolate chip, please, Tommy ordered, oblivious to the tension. The elderly owner, Mrs. Sullivan, managed a shaky smile as she scooped the ice cream, her eyes darting nervously to the bikers. "That'll be $5, she said softly. "10, one of the prospects called out. "Price just went up." Michael turned, slowly positioning himself between Tommy and the bikers. He kept his voice level, quiet. Mrs. Sullivan said 5. The prospects exchanged looks, sensing an opportunity to impress their superiors. The larger one stood, revealing a prison-built physique. "Maybe you didn't hear right, friend. Everything in town just got more expensive, including ice cream." Tommy pressed closer to Michael's side, finally sensing the danger. Michael handed Mrs. Sullivan a $5 bill, his movements deliberately calm. "My son and I are just getting ice cream. No need to complicate things." The second prospect rose now, both men moving to flank them. Michael noted their positions, their stances, cataloguing weaknesses with professional detachment. The bigger one favored his left leg slightly, an old injury. The other kept his right hand near his belt, probably concealing a weapon. "Dad?" Tommy's voice wavered. "It's okay, buddy. Eat your ice cream." Michael guided his son toward the door, maintaining awareness of the prospects' positions. They followed, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. In the parking lot, Michael helped Tommy into the truck, hyper-aware of the approaching footsteps behind him. He could end this now. 2 prospects wouldn't be a challenge for someone with his training, but that would escalate things, draw attention he couldn't afford. Not with Tommy to protect. "This ain't over," the bigger prospect called as Michael got in the driver's seat. "You'll learn how things work around here now." Michael started the engine, watching in his rear-view mirror as the prospect swaggered back inside. Through the window, he saw Mrs. Sullivan hurriedly closing up, tears in her eyes as she counted the day's meager earnings. "Dad?" Tommy's voice was small. "Those men were mean." "Some people are, buddy." Michael pulled out of the parking lot, his mind already working through scenarios, contingencies. "But remember what Mom used to say? Mean people are just scared people being loud." "That's right." Michael smiled, but his eyes were scanning the streets, noting which businesses had already been visited by the Death Riders, which ones were next, and scared people make mistakes. As they drove home, Michael watched the sun setting over Cedar Lake, its surface no longer peaceful but threatening, like a storm was brewing beneath its waters. In a way, it was. And he had decisions to make about whether to let it break or stop it before it could begin. Dawn hadn't yet broken over Cedar Lake when the rumble of motorcycles shattered the morning silence. Michael tensed at the sound, his hands pausing mid-cast as he watched a dozen Death Riders roll into the parking lot. Tommy, still sleepy-eyed beside him, gripped his fishing rod tighter. Well, Razor's voice carried across the water as he dismounted his bike. "Looks like someone doesn't understand about private property." Michael kept his voice steady, though his mind was already calculating angles, distances, threats. "Public lake, friend. Room enough for everyone." The gang spread out along the shoreline, their boots crushing the delicate wildflowers that Sarah used to photograph. 2 members carried baseball bats, swinging them casually as they approached the wooden dock where Michael and Tommy stood. "Public!" Razor laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. "Nothing's public anymore, friend. Everything has an owner." He pulled out a knife, using it to clean under his fingernails. "Everything has a price." Michael touched Tommy's shoulder. "Pack up your gear, son." "But Dad..." "Now, Tommy." The boy began gathering his equipment, hands trembling slightly as he tried to move quickly without showing fear. Michael watched the Death Riders through his peripheral vision, noting weapons, positions, likely first movers. "Cute kid," one of the bikers commented, moving closer to Tommy. "Should teach him about respect, though. Proper payment for using private facilities." Michael stepped between them. "He's learning plenty, including how to tell the difference between brave men and bullies." The first punch came from the left, predictable, telegraphed. Michael could have blocked it, countered it, ended the fight before it began. Instead, he took it, letting his body roll with the impact. He had to play this carefully. "Dad!" Tommy's cry cut through the morning air. "Get to the truck, Tommy. Lock the doors." The boy hesitated only a moment before running. Michael watched him go, making sure he made it safely while absorbing another hit. The taste of copper filled his mouth. "Not so tough now, are you?" Razor sneered, gesturing to his men. They began systematically destroying the fishing gear, snapping rods, slicing lines, dumping tackle boxes into the lake. The special rod, Sarah, had given Tommy on his 8th birthday, splintered under a boot. Michael stood silent, watching it all. His hands remained loose at his sides, but inside something was shifting. Not the hot rage of an angry father, but the cold, calculating fury of a predator choosing its moment. "Next time, the price won't be just your fishing gear," Razor said, moving close enough that Michael could smell stale cigarettes on his breath. "Bring cash tomorrow, lots of it. Or maybe we pay your kid a visit at school, teach him some manners." "Ourselves." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Michael met Razor's eyes, letting him see nothing but a frightened father. But behind that mask, behind the split lip and forming bruises, Michael Stone was already planning. The Death Riders had just made their final mistake. "We understand each other." Razor pressed the knife point against Michael's chest. "Perfectly." Michael's voice was quiet, controlled. "We won't be back." Laughter followed him as he walked to his truck, the sound of braking fishing gear and revving motorcycles echoing across the lake. Through the windshield he could see Tommy's tears, could see the question in his son's eyes. "Why didn't you fight back, Dad?" But as Michael started the engine, his mind was already shifting gears. No more peaceful mornings teaching his son to fish. No more pretending he could leave his other life behind. The Death Riders hadn't just threatened him, they'd threatened his child, destroyed the last gift from his wife, and terrorized a town he'd sworn to protect. They thought they'd marked their territory. Instead, they'd just walked into his. Michael watched Tommy pick at his breakfast, the boy's usual appetite gone. The morning's events had left their mark, not in bruises like the ones darkening Michael's jaw, but in something deeper. The silence between them felt heavy, loaded with unasked questions. "I need you to stay with the Rodriguezes for a few days, buddy," Michael finally said, his decision made. Tommy's head snapped up. "But why? Is it because of those men? We can just find another place to fish, Dad. Or we don't have to fish." And all. The tremor in his son's voice made Michael's resolve harden like steel. He pulled out his phone, sending a text he hadn't thought he'd ever need to send again. "Phoenix Protocol. Active. Ms. Rodriguez already said you can help her with the school garden project," Michael continued, keeping his voice gentle. "Remember how excited you were about that, Dad?" Tommy's eyes, so much like Sarah's, filled with tears. "Are you going? Away again, like before?" Before, when he'd gone deep undercover, leaving Tommy with Sarah's sister for months at a time, before Sarah's death had changed everything. Michael moved around the table, pulling his son into a tight embrace. "Just a few days," he promised. "Sometimes, buddy, the only way to stop bullies is to show them they picked the wrong target." His phone buzzed, a response from his old handler. "Assets moving, 2 hours, confirm location." Michael texted back coordinates for a meet, then called Carmen Rodriguez. She answered on the first ring, already aware of the situation through the small-town grapevine. "Bring him over," she said before he could ask. "Diego's been wanting a gaming buddy anyway." In his bedroom, Michael opened the false back of his closet. The safe inside contained more than just his service weapon. Files, burner phones, IDs, and equipment he'd hoped never to use again lay waiting. His fingers moved over the keypad with practiced ease. "Pack for a few days, Tommy," he called out, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. "And, buddy, pack your mom's compass, too, for luck." While Tommy packed, Michael made another call, this one to Sheriff Cooper. "Dave, it's Stone. Remember that favor you owe me from the gunrunner case?" "Been wondering when you'd call," Dave replied. "Those bikers making things personal?" "Very. I need you to look the other way for a few days, and maybe lose any paperwork that comes across your desk. A pause, then, like last time. Like last time! Tommy appeared in the doorway, backpack ready, Sarah's old compass clutched in his hand. The sight nearly broke Michael's resolve. Nearly! Dad? Tommy's voice was small. Those men, they broke Mum's fishing rod, the one she gave me. Michael knelt before his son, taking the compass and fastening it securely to Tommy's belt loop, like Sarah used to do. I know, buddy, and that's one of the reasons I have to do this. Mum always said we have to stand up to bullies, remember? But she also said we have to be smart about it. Michael smiled, touching the compass. That's exactly what I'm going to be. Smart, careful, like Mom taught us. The drive to the Rodriguez house was quiet. Tommy lost in thought. As they pulled up, Michael saw Carmen waiting on the porch, her face lined with concern. She'd been Sarah's best friend, understood better than most what Michael was capable of. 3 days, Michael promised Tommy, hugging him tight. Be good for Miss Rodriguez. Be careful, Dad, Tommy whispered, like Mom would want. Michael watched until Tommy disappeared inside, then checked his phone. One new message. Team assembled. Ready for your lead. As he drove toward the meeting point, Michael felt the familiar shift inside him, the transition from caring father to something else entirely. The Death Riders thought they'd intimidated a simple fisherman. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The peaceful dad who taught his son to fish was gone. In his place sat a man who'd spent 15 years infiltrating criminal organizations, who'd brought down cartels and crime families without ever firing a shot. A man who knew exactly how to dismantle an operation from the inside out. The Death Riders had just started a war they didn't even know was coming. The abandoned boat repair shop at the edge of town had become the Death Riders' de facto headquarters. Michael observed it from 200 yards away, his binoculars revealing details that most would miss. 3 guards, rotating in predictable patterns, a crude alarm system of empty beer bottles arranged near entry points. The main door reinforced, but the back loading dock vulnerable. Full count is 28 members, 6 prospects. Agent Maria Torres reported from beside him. She'd been his handler on 3 major operations, understood his methods better than anyone. Local chapter was 12 before Razor brought in reinforcements from upstate. Michael lowered the binoculars, making notes in his mental file. Supply lines, weekly shipments coming in through the marina. Drugs, mostly, some weapons. They're using fishing boats as cover. She passed him a tablet showing surveillance photos. Port authorities been paid off. The images confirmed what he'd suspected. The Death Riders weren't just another motorcycle gang marking territory. This was a calculated expansion, using Cedar Lake's remote location and countless hidden coves as a distribution hub. Local support. Besides the Port Authority, Maria swiped through more photos. 2 deputies on payroll, maybe the county clerk. Sheriff's clean. Your friend Cooper's been trying to build a case, but can't get anything to stick. Michael watched a prospect leave the repair shop, heading toward town on a beer run. The kid couldn't be more than 20, eager to prove himself to his new family. Another would take his place soon. Prospects always traveled in pairs. Their weakness isn't in their security, he said quietly. It's in their certainty. They think they're untouchable here. Maria nodded, familiar with his approach. No rival gangs within 100 miles. Local law enforcement undermanned and compromised. Perfect setup for them. Too perfect. Michael's mind was already calculating angles, pressure points, the small cracks that could bring down an empire. They're not watching their backs because they don't think they need to. He pulled out his phone, showing Maria the photos he'd taken around town. The systematic intimidation, the protection rackets, the gradual tightening of control. They're following a playbook, one they've used before, and that makes them predictable, Maria finished. She'd seen him work enough times to know where this was going. What's your play? Michael's eyes tracked another prospect arriving at the repair shop, right on schedule. They're organized, disciplined, military precision in their operations. That means they have a chain of command, protocols. Razor's ex-military. Dishonorable discharge from the Marines. Most of his inner circle too. Which means they think like soldiers. Michael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. They're looking for enemies at the gates. They won't see one rising. And from within, he stood, dusting off his jeans. The bruises on his face from the morning's encounter would serve his purpose perfectly. Get me everything you have on their previous operations. Towns they've taken over, patterns they follow, and I need a cover ready by tonight. Maria was already typing on her tablet. What's the approach? Former force recon, discharged under questionable circumstances, looking for a fresh start, willing to prove myself useful. He checked his watch. The prospect on Beer Run will be at Jake's bar in 10 minutes. Time to introduce myself. Michael. Maria's voice stopped him. Local intel says they're planning something big at the Lake Festival next week. Some kind of show of force to lock down their control of the town. He thought of Tommy, of Sarah's broken fishing rod, of Mrs. Sullivan's tears in the ice cream shop. Then we have 7 days to take down an entire organized crime operation? Maria raised an eyebrow. Even for you, that's ambitious. 7 days, Michael repeated, checking the burner phone that would become his lifeline. They threatened my son, Maria, destroyed the last gift his mother gave him. This isn't just another operation. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. I'll have the team in place, but Michael, don't let this get personal. He turned back, toward the repair shop, where another prospect was starting his patrol. It became personal the moment they came to my lake. As he walked away, Michael felt the familiar shift in his mind, the careful compartmentalization that had kept him alive during years of undercover work. The concerned father, the grieving widower, all carefully packed away, in their place. Emerged the hunter, the man who could smile while orchestrating your downfall. The Death Riders were about to meet Michael Stone, but by the time they realized who he really was, it would be far too late. Jake's bar smelled of stale beer and desperation, the kind of place where dreams went to die and secrets were traded like currency. Michael nursed his whiskey, watching the young Death Riders prospect struggle with a case of beer at the bar. Right on schedule. Need a hand? Michael stood, making sure to sway slightly, playing the part of a man seeking oblivion at the bottom of a glass. His bruised face told its own story. The prospect, ghost by his patch, sized him up. I got it. Sure you do. Michael let a hint of military bearings slip into his posture. Just enough to catch attention. Just like I had it when I left. The core. Before everything went to shit, Ghost paused, interest flickering across his young face. Michael had seen that look before, the recognition of a kindred spirit, another warrior lost in civilian life. It was always the same with ex-military types. They could spot their own. Force recon? Ghost asked, trying to sound casual. Was. Michael's voice carried just the right mix of pride and bitterness. Until some pencil pusher decided my methods were too extreme for peacetime operations. The prospect's eyes darted to Michael's bruises. Looks like you're still finding trouble. More like it found me. Michael grabbed another case of beer. Some local boys took offense to me fishing in their lake this morning. Didn't much care that I'd fought for their right to be assholes. Understanding dawned on Ghost's face. Michael watched the mental calculations, saw the moment the prospect thought this opportunity was his own idea. Maybe you should talk to some friends of mine. They understand about respecting veterans. Meanwhile, across town, Maria's team was moving into position. The surveillance photos she'd taken revealed a pattern of weekly meetings between the corrupt Port Authority official and the Death Riders supply coordinator. Tonight was their usual rendezvous. Agent Chen, dressed as a busboy, placed the hidden microphone under their regular table at the Cedar Lake steakhouse. Agent Rodriguez positioned himself at the marina, documenting every boat that entered or left the harbor. The net was being cast, wide and invisible. Back at Jake's, Michael helped Ghost load the beer into a beat-up truck. Your friends, the ones Riding Harleys? Been seeing them around town? Death Riders. Ghost puffed up slightly. We're establishing a presence here, making things right. Michael snorted. Right for who? For everyone who matters. Ghost hesitated, then made his play. You should come by, meet some of the brothers. Guys like you. We could use someone with real combat experience. Michael pretended to consider it, though this had been the plan all along. Maybe I will. Got nothing better to do in this town anyway. The old repair shop, North End. Ask for Razor. Ghost started the truck. Tell him Ghost said you're solid. As the truck pulled away, Michael pulled out his burner phone. A text from Maria was waiting. Port Authority meeting confirmed, recording in place. Another message from Sheriff Cooper. Deputies Miller and Jones called in sick today. Spotted at repair shop. The pieces were moving. By morning, Michael would have audio confirmation of the Death Riders' smuggling operation. By tomorrow night, he'd be inside their organization. A ghost among ghosts. He made one final call before heading home. Carmen, how's Tommy? Missing you, Carmen Rodriguez answered. But he's keeping busy. He and Diego are planning their garden project. Michael closed his eyes, allowing himself one moment of fatherly concern. Tell him I'm making things right. Be careful, Michael, Carmen said softly. I know what Sarah would say. He cut her off gently. That's why I have to do this. Later that night, in his empty house, Michael reviewed everything Maria's team had gathered. The Death Riders' previous operations followed a clear pattern. Start with intimidation, escalate to protection rackets, then establish smuggling routes once control was cemented. Cedar Lake was perfect for their expansion, remote enough to avoid major law enforcement attention, with plenty of hidden coves and corrupt officials willing to look the other way. But their military precision, their careful planning, would be their downfall, because Michael Stone had spent 15 years learning how organizations like this thought, how they moved, how they broke. He pinned their photos to his wall. Razor, his lieutenants, the prospects, the corrupt officials. A web of connections and vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited. 7 days to dismantle an empire. Tomorrow, he would become one of them. And like a cancer introduced into a healthy body, he would spread through their organization until it destroyed itself from within. For Tommy, for Sarah, for a quiet lake where a father could teach his son to fish in peace. The Death Riders' repair shop buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread about a major shipment coming in, their biggest yet. Michael, now known to them as Reaper, leaned against his borrowed Harley, watching the preparations through carefully. Disinterested eyes. 3 days of proving himself, of sharing just enough war stories to seem authentic while holding back enough to remain interesting. The bruises on his face had helped, badges of honor in a world where violence earned respect. Ghost had vouched for him, and his military background had done the rest. Reaper! Razor's voice cut through the pre-dawn air. You're with Snake and Diesel on escort duty. Keep it clean, keep it quiet. Michael nodded, noting how Razor's order confirmed Maria's intel. A shipment of cocaine worth $2 million, coming in through the marina's blind spots. The Death Riders were getting bold, moving product in broad daylight, confident in their control of local authorities. But they didn't know about the GPS tracker Michael had planted on their supply coordinator's bike, or the microscopic cameras, now scattered throughout their headquarters. Every move they made was being watched, recorded, documented. Looking forward to some action, Michael commented to Snake, playing his role. Been too quiet since I left the Corps. Snake, a hulking ex-Army Ranger with prison tattoos, grunted in agreement. Town's gotten soft, needs reminded who's in charge. They mounted their bikes, the rumble of engines shattering the morning peace. Michael felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, not from the motorcycle's power, but from knowing his plan was in motion. One wrong move, one slip in his cover, and he'd have 28 angry bikers out for blood. At the marina, everything seemed normal. Fishing boats bobbed gently in their slips. Early morning anglers preparing for a day on the lake. But Michael's trained eye caught the subtle signs. The harbour master conspicuously absent, the security cameras conveniently malfunctioning. A sleek cigarette boat approached, cutting through the morning mist. Right on schedule. Showtime. Diesel muttered, moving to his position. Michael watched the choreographed dance unfold. Duffel bags passed from boat to waiting hands, quickly disappeared into hidden compartments on their bikes. Professional, efficient, military precision that would make their operation nearly impossible to catch. Nearly. "We've got company," Snake suddenly hissed. "Harbour patrol." Michael tensed, knowing what was coming. The harbour patrol boat was right on time, Maria's team, ensuring everything played out perfectly. "Handle it!" Razor's voice crackled through their radios. Snake and Diesel moved toward their bikes, but Michael stepped forward. "Let me. Been wanting to prove my worth." Razor's pause was brief. "Do it clean." Michael jogged toward the patrol boat, where two officers were making a show of checking licenses. They were Maria's people, of course, but the Death Riders didn't know that. What happened next was carefully choreographed violence. Michael made it look good. A quiet conversation turned heated, a scuffle that ended with both officers in the water, their boat drifting away from the dock. Enough force to seem real, but carefully controlled to avoid actual injury. "Problem solved," he reported back, letting a hint of satisfaction color his voice. The approval in Razor's eyes was immediate. This was the kind of solution they understood. Quick, violent, effective. Michael had just proven himself valuable. Back at the repair shop, the mood was celebratory. A successful run, a clean getaway, and a new brother who'd proven his worth. Michael accepted the beer they offered, pretending to drink while observing everything. He watched Razor make a call to their connection at the Port Authority, confirming the next shipment. Watched Snake count out payments to the corrupt deputies. Every word, every detail captured by the surveillance equipment hidden throughout the building. "You did good today," Ghost told him, riding high on their success. "Razor's impressed. Says you might be ready for something bigger." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Bigger? Lake Festival's coming up. Whole town'll be there." Ghost grinned. "Perfect time to show everyone who really runs things now." "Looking forward to it," Michael replied, even as his mind raced through implications. The festival was Tommy's favorite event of the year. Whatever the Death Riders were planning, it wouldn't end well for the townspeople. That night, after making his report to Maria, Michael stood in his backyard, staring at the lake. The shipment they'd helped bring in today would be their undoing. Every person involved was now documented, their roles proven, but he couldn't move yet. Not until they had the whole operation, including whatever they were planning for the festival. His phone buzzed. A picture from Carmen. Tommy in the Rodriguez's garden, proudly holding up a tomato plant he'd helped grow. The boy was smiling, but Michael could see the question in his eyes. "When are you coming home, Dad?" "Soon, buddy," he whispered to the night air. "Just a few more days." The Death Riders thought they'd gained a valuable new member today. Instead, they'd invited in the weapon of their own destruction. And Michael Stone was just getting started. Cedar Lake's main street had transformed in just 4 days. Every business now displayed a small Death Riders sticker in their window. Protected territory, bought with fear and marked with shame. Michael walked past Martha's diner, noting the defeated slump of her shoulders as she served breakfast to 3 leather-clad bikers. His burner phone vibrated, a message from Maria. "Port Authority talking. Full confession recorded. Moving on Harbour Master next." The pieces were falling into place, but not fast enough. The Death Riders were escalating their control over the town faster than anticipated. Yesterday they'd broken Mr. Chen's arm when he couldn't make his protection payment. The liquor store remained closed, its owner in the hospital, while rumors spread about accidents happening to uncooperative business owners. "Reaper," Ghost called out from across the street. The young prospect had become Michael's shadow, eager to learn from someone he saw as a hardened warrior. "Razor wants everyone at the shop. Something big going down." Michael followed, his mind racing. The Lake Festival was still 3 days away. Whatever they were planning, it was happening sooner than expected. The repair shop was packed, tension thick in the air. Razor stood at the center, his face dark with rage. On the floor in front of him lay a bag of white powder, spilled open, their product clearly tampered with. "Someone's stealing from us," Razor announced as Michael entered. "Cutting our product, skimming profits?" His eyes swept the room. "And I want to know who." Michael kept his face carefully neutral. He'd made the switch himself 2 nights ago, replacing portions of their cocaine with harmless powder. The first seed of discord, planted carefully to grow into chaos, could be the suppliers, Snake suggested. "They've done it before." "Or the harbor master," another member added. "Been acting nervous lately." Razor's fist slammed down on a table. "I don't care who it is. Find them. Make an example." His eyes locked on Michael. "Reaper, take Ghost and check our suppliers. Snake, and pay our friend at the harbor a visit." The gang scattered to their tasks, but Michael caught the undercurrent of suspicion. Friend accusing friend, trust eroding like sand beneath waves. "Exactly as planned. You really think it's the suppliers?" Ghost asked as they rode toward the marina. "Always suspect everyone," Michael replied, letting Ghost hear what he wanted to. "That's how you survive." The day unfolded in a series of calculated moves. Michael and Ghost found nothing at the supplier's hideout because there was nothing to find. But Snake's visit to the harbor master sparked panic. The man, already nervous from Maria's pressure, cracked. By sunset, he was telling the Death Riders about federal agents asking questions, about surveillance and investigations. "Feds?" Razor spat the word during their emergency meeting. "In my town?" Michael watched the fear spread through the room. These men weren't afraid of local cops, but federal attention was different. Prison terms measured in decades, RICO charges, asset seizure, the kind of consequences that made hardened criminals think twice. "Could be nothing," Michael suggested, playing his role. "Harbor masters spooked, probably seeing ghosts." Or, "Someone's talking," Razor countered. "Someone's bringing heat down on us right before our biggest move." The paranoia was spreading exactly as Michael had planned. But as he watched Razor's growing rage, he realized things were accelerating too. Quickly, the Death Riders were like a wounded animal now, unpredictable, dangerous. His phone buzzed again. A text from Carmen, "Tommy asking when you're coming home, missing you at Garden." Then another from Maria, "Deputies flipping, full confession expected tomorrow." The operation was working perfectly. Too perfectly. The Death Riders were being backed into a corner, and Michael knew from experience that's when organizations like this were most dangerous. They'd strike hard, strike fast, try to reassert control through violence, and the Lake Festival was still 3 days away. Walking home that night, Michael passed the ice cream parlor. Mrs. Sullivan was closing up, her hands shaking as she counted. The day's protection money. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of a familiar photo. Tommy's fishing trip from last summer, the one where he'd caught his first bass. Sarah had given Mrs. Sullivan a copy, back when the biggest worry in Cedar Lake was whether the fish were biting. The photo was cracked now, the glass broken in a corner. Like everything else the Death Riders touched, another piece of innocence shattered. Michael's jaw tightened. He'd wanted to dismantle their organization carefully, methodically, but watching his town, his people, suffer under their grip, he knew. Time was running out. He couldn't wait 3 more days. The Death Riders wanted escalation. He'd give them escalation they'd never forget. The Federal Task Force's mobile command center was disguised as a camping trailer, parked inconspicuously at the far end of the lake. Inside, Maria studied the wall of surveillance photos and data, her expression grim as Michael delivered his. "Report. They're unraveling faster than expected," he said, pointing to recent photos. 3 fights broke out yesterday. Snake accused his own lieutenant of skimming profits. Razor's drinking heavily, getting paranoid. "The harbor master's testimony is solid," Maria confirmed. "Deputies, too. They're falling over themselves to make deals." She paused, studying a photo of Razor. But that makes them dangerous. More than you know. Michael pulled out his burner phone, showing her messages from Ghost. They're moving up their timeline. Festival's too far away. They're planning something for tomorrow night. The images on Ghost's phone showed weapons being unpacked at the repair shop. Not just the usual handguns and knives, but serious firepower. Military-grade assault rifles, explosives, the kind of arsenal meant for war. They're going to hit every business on Main Street simultaneously, Michael continued. Show of force, remind everyone who's in charge. Anyone who doesn't pay up gets an example made of them. Maria's fingers flew over her keyboard, coordinating with other agents. We've got enough to move on them now. End this before it gets worse. No. Michael's voice was firm. Not yet. There's still a piece missing. What? Piece? We have the drugs, the weapons, testimonies. Their real supplier. Michael tapped the photo of Razor. Everything we've uncovered. It's too organized, too well-funded for a typical biker gang. Someone bigger is backing them using Cedar Lake as a test run. If you're right, moving too soon tips our hand. Maria understood immediately. We lose the connection to their real boss. Exactly. Michael checked his watch. I'm supposed to meet Razor in an hour. He's promoting me to his inner circle. That's not all he's doing. Maria handed him a tablet. Our surveillance caught this an hour ago. The image showed 2 Death Riders parked outside the Rodriguez house. Watching Tommy play in the garden, Michael's blood ran cold. They're suspicious, or insurance. Maria's voice was gentle. Michael, if they made you... They haven't. He stood, checking his weapons. But I need to end this. Tonight. How? The same way I always do. His voice was deadly calm. I give them exactly what they're afraid of. Back at the repair shop, tension crackled like electricity before a storm. Members clustered in small groups, whispered conversations stopping when others walked past. Trust had evaporated, replaced by suspicion and fear. Reaper. Razor's voice carried across the room. My office. The leader's private space was sparse. A desk, some chairs, and a wall of surveillance photos of the town. Michael noted new additions. Pictures of federal agents at the marina, the harbor master talking to investigators, and most tellingly, a photo of Michael himself at the lake with Tommy. Quite a collection, Michael commented, keeping his voice neutral. Knowledge is power. Razor poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Especially knowing who your friends are. And aren't. Michael accepted the glass but didn't drink. Sounds like you've got trust issues. Maybe. Razor studied him over the rim of his glass. Thing is, problems started showing up right around when you did. Product getting cut, feds sniffing around, longtime friends suddenly growing consciences. Coincidence, Michael shrugged. Or maybe your operation's getting too big to control. Maybe. Razor set down his glass. Or maybe we've got ourselves a ghost. Someone working from the inside, invisible until it's too late. The tension in the room shifted, became deadly. Michael sensed movement behind him, Snake and another member blocking the door. Thing about ghosts, though, Razor continued, his hand moving toward his desk drawer, is they all have weaknesses, things they care about. He pulled out a photo. Tommy, in the Rodriguez's garden, taken that morning. Or people. Michael allowed himself a small smile. Not of fear, but of anticipation. Because Razor had just made a fatal mistake. He'd threatened the wrong man's son. You're right, Michael said softly. Everyone has weaknesses. His hand moved, but not toward a weapon. Instead, he pulled out his phone and pressed a single button. Throughout the building, phones began to buzz with incoming messages. Photos, recordings, evidence that had been gathering for days, now spreading through their ranks like a virus. Razor's eyes widened as his own phone chimed. What did you... I gave them what they feared most, Michael said. The truth. The sound of approaching sirens began to fill the air. Chaos erupted in the repair shop as phones continued buzzing with revelations. Michael watched the destruction of the Death Riders unfold like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. Every message, every photo, every recorded conversation had been precisely chosen to hit where it hurt most. Snake stared at his phone, face contorting with rage as he listened to his lieutenant making deals with federal agents. Around the room, other members were discovering similar betrayals, evidence of skimmed profits, secret deals, and backstabbing that Michael had carefully documented and now released. "You see, Razor," Michael's voice cut through the growing chaos. "Everyone has a pressure point. Yours is control. You need it, crave it, can't stand the thought of losing it." He gestured to the phones, still buzzing throughout the room. "Now watch it slip away." Razor lunged across his desk, but Michael was already moving. Years of training made the response automatic. A swift deflection followed by a precise strike that sent the gang leader crashing into his wall of surveillance photos. "He's a cop!" Razor screamed, scrambling for his weapon. "Kill him!" But the command that would have brought instant death just days ago now met hesitation. Every member was too busy discovering how their brothers had betrayed them, too caught up in their own rage and suspicion to act as one. "Think about it," Michael called out to the room. "Who's been stealing your profits, setting you up to take falls, making deals behind your backs? Not me." He locked eyes with Ghost, the young prospect looking betrayed and confused. "I just showed you the truth. Your own brothers did the rest." The first punch was thrown not at Michael, but between members. Snake, enraged by his lieutenant's betrayal, started the brawl that quickly engulfed the room. Years of buried grudges and suspicions exploded into violence. Michael used the chaos to his advantage, moving efficiently through the mayhem. His training wasn't about winning fights, it was about achieving objectives while others fought. He reached the repair shop's office, where the real evidence was kept. Razor had recovered, pulling a gun from his desk. "You're dead," he snarled. "You and that kid of yours?" The mention of Tommy was all Michael needed. His response was swift, brutal, and precisely calculated. Razor might have been ex-military, might have led a gang of hardened criminals, but Michael Stone was something else entirely. A ghost, a shadow, the kind of operative who ended conflicts before they became wars. "You made 3 mistakes," Michael said, disarming Razor with practiced ease. "First, you came to my town. Second, you threatened my son." He secured the gang leader's hands with zip ties. "And third, you assumed fear was the only way to control people." Through the office window, Michael could see the Death Riders tearing themselves apart. The evidence he'd released wasn't just about crimes. It was about trust betrayed, loyalties bought, brothers selling out brothers. The kind of revelations that destroyed organizations more effectively than any police raid. Federal agents. The command center's response was perfectly timed, led by Maria herself. They found a gang already defeated, not by bullets or badges, but by their own paranoia and betrayal. "You've got nothing," Razor spat as agents secured the building. "No one will testify. No one will talk." Michael smiled, almost pitying. "They already have. Your whole operation, every smuggling route, every corrupt official, every connection to your real bosses. While you were watching for enemies outside, I was learning everything from within. My bosses." Now there was real fear in Razor's eyes. "You didn't think you could fund an operation this big on protection money from small-town shops, did you?" Michael leaned close. "The cartel won't be happy when they learn how you lost their investment. But don't worry. Federal witness protection is an option if you cooperate." As Razor was led away, Maria approached with an evidence bag full of documents from the office. "Clean sweep. We got it all, including the cartel connection. Not bad for 7 days' work." Michael watched through the window as the sun began to rise over Cedar Lake. The water sparkled just like it had that morning with Tommy, before the Death Riders had arrived. Before they'd made the mistake of threatening a peaceful town, a quiet lake, a father and son just trying to fish. "The lake festival's still on for the weekend," Maria mentioned. "Think the town will still celebrate?" Michael thought of Tommy's excitement about the festival, of the garden he was growing with the Rodriguez family, of the peaceful mornings yet to come. They'll celebrate, because now they know something the Death Riders never understood. What's that? Real strength isn't about causing fear. He pulled out his phone, looking at the photo of Tommy with his first fish. It's about giving people something worth protecting. The sirens faded into the distance as the last of the arrests were made. Cedar Lake was waking up to a new day, one without Death Riders, without fear. And somewhere in the Rodriguez's garden, a boy was tending his plants, waiting for his father to come home. The victory was short-lived. As Michael left the repair shop, his burner phone buzzed with an urgent message from Sheriff Cooper. Miller and Jones missing from custody. Station security footage wiped. The corrupt deputies hadn't been taken to the federal holding facility with the others. Standard procedure meant they were temporarily held at the local station. A fatal mistake. Someone had helped them escape, someone with access to police resources. Michael's phone rang. Maria's voice was tense. "We've got a problem. The cartel connection? It goes higher than we thought. Way higher." "How high?" "State level, maybe federal. Our secure channels are compromised." She paused. "Michael, they know who you are, all of it." The implications hit him like ice water. If the corrupt network reached that high, and they knew his identity, his personal phone rang. Carmen Rodriguez. His heart stopped. They took him. Carmen's voice was barely a whisper. 3 men, police uniforms, said they were moving Tommy to protective custody. I tried to stop them, but they had badges, proper paperwork. "Michael, I'm so sorry." The world narrowed to a single point of focus. Michael was already moving, his mind shifting into a gear he hadn't accessed since Sarah's death. "When?" 20 minutes ago. They headed north on Lake Road. He gunned his motorcycle's engine, weaving through early morning traffic. "Call Cooper. Tell him to lock down every road out of town. Then get your family somewhere safe." "Michael." Carmen's voice broke. "They knew things. About you, about Sarah's case, said they were taking Tommy to protect him from you." The pieces clicked into place. Sarah's death had never been a simple operation gone wrong. It had been a message, one he'd been too blind to see until now. And now they had his son. His earpiece crackled, Maria patching through on a secure frequency. "Local bolo out for..." Miller and Jones. Highway patrol spotted them in a police cruiser with a child matching Tommy's description. They're heading toward the old logging complex. The logging complex. Abandoned mills and warehouses north of town. Perfect for an ambush, or worse, a handoff to cartel enforcers. Michael pushed his bike harder, the engine screaming in protest. "Maria, I need everything you have on Miller and Jones. Full background, every connection, every skeleton in their closets." "Already on it. But Michael, we've got another problem. Remember that FBI task force supervisor who signed off on this operation? Daniels? He's gone dark. His authorization codes were used to access Tommy's protective custody files 10 minutes before the abduction. The betrayal went deeper than he'd imagined. While he'd been dismantling the Death Riders, a larger predator had been watching, waiting, using his success to flush out bigger prey. His phone buzzed again, an unknown number. The text contained a single photo. Tommy, scared but unharmed, sitting in the back of a police cruiser. Below it, coordinates and a message. "Time to finish. What started with Sarah, come alone." Michael's voice was ice when he responded to Maria. "How many clean agents can you guarantee?" 3, maybe 4. The rest, I can't be sure anymore. Get them to the logging complex, but keep them back until I give the signal. Michael, wait for backup. This is bigger than... They have my son." His tone left no room for argument. "And now they've made the same mistake. The Death Riders did. They thought fear would make me predictable." The morning sun painted Cedar Lake blood red as Michael raced north. The Death Riders had been a warm-up, he realized now. A test to see if he still had his edge. And he'd passed. Dismantling their operation exactly as expected, exposing himself in the process. Now the real enemy was revealed. The same shadows that had taken Sarah, now reaching for Tommy. But they'd forgotten something crucial about Michael Stone. He wasn't just a cop who could infiltrate criminal organizations. He was a father who'd already lost half his family too. These people, and he was done playing by anyone's rules but his own. The logging complex loomed ahead, a maze of abandoned buildings and rusted machinery. Michael killed his motorcycle's engine half a mile out, approaching on foot through the morning mist. His earpiece crackled with Maria's voice. Satellite shows. 6 heat signatures in the main warehouse, 2 by the entrance, 4 inside, 1 smaller, probably Tommy. Michael checked his weapon, more out of habit than necessity. Any word on Daniels? His phone just pinged near your location. Michael, the corruption goes back years. Daniels was Sarah's supervisor too. The revelation should have shocked him, but somehow it felt like confirmation of something he'd always suspected. Sarah's death had been too clean, too perfectly staged to be a simple operation gone wrong. Keep your team back, he instructed. If this goes bad, Tommy's going to need someone to finish what I started. It won't go bad. Maria's voice was firm. We've got your back. That's what they told Sarah, too. He moved through the complex like a ghost. Years of training, making him one with the shadows. The 2 guards at the entrance were Miller and Jones. The corrupt deputies looking nervous as they smoked cigarettes. This is messed up, man, Miller was saying. Using a kid. Shut up, Jones snapped. You want to end up like his wife. Michael's blood ran cold, but his hands remained steady. He'd suspected they'd been involved in Sarah's death, but hearing it confirmed, a child's cry echoed from inside the warehouse. Tommy. Michael moved. The deputies never saw him coming. 2 precise strikes, and they crumpled silently. He secured them with their own handcuffs, collecting their weapons and radios. Inside the warehouse, footsteps echoed on metal catwalks. Through gaps in the wall, he could see Tommy seated in a chair, supervised by 2 men in tactical gear, cartel professionals, not local muscle. I know you're out there, Stone. Daniel's voice carried through the empty space. Let's talk about Sarah. Let's talk about how you betrayed her, Michael called back, moving to a new position. How you sold her out to the cartel. She was getting too close, just like you are now. Some operations are bigger than one agent's conscience. Michael spotted him on the upper catwalk, FBI vest, service weapon drawn. 2 more cartel gunmen flanked him. You know what happens next? Daniels continued. You disappear, like Sarah did. Tommy goes into the system. A tragic story about a dirty cop who got his family killed. You're forgetting something, Michael replied, his voice echoing to mask his position. Yeah, what's that? Sarah taught me everything she knew, including how to identify corrupt supervisors. He triggered the flashbangs he'd planted while talking, a trick Sarah had indeed taught him. The warehouse erupted in chaos. In the confusion, he moved with surgical precision. The first cartel gunman went down before the ringing stopped. The second managed to fire twice, bullets sparking off machinery as Michael closed the distance. A quick exchange of blows, and another threat was neutralized. Tommy, close your eyes! Michael shouted, knowing what came next. Daniels had recovered, gun trained on the boy. It's over, Stone. Sarah made the same choice, her principles or her family. Look where that got her. No, Michael's voice came from behind him. Sarah made them think she chose principles. While she gathered evidence against everyone involved, Daniels spun, but too late. His gun clattered on the catwalk as Michael disarmed him with the same move Sarah had perfected years ago. Evidence she gave to me, Michael finished. Right before. That operation gone wrong. The FBI supervisor's eyes widened in realization. All this time, they'd thought they'd silenced Sarah's investigation. They hadn't known she'd managed to pass everything to her husband first. Dad! Tommy's cry broke through the moment. Close your eyes, buddy, Michael said softly. Just for a minute longer. What happened next was quick, professional, and exactly what Sarah would have wanted. The safe house Maria had arranged was a lakeside cabin 20 miles from Cedar Lake. As Tommy slept in the back room, exhausted from the morning's events, Michael spread Sarah's evidence across the kitchen table. Files, photos, and USB drives. the legacy of her final investigation. "It's all here," Maria said, reviewing the documents. "Money trails, corrupt officials, cartel connections." Sarah mapped the entire network. She looked up at Michael. "Why didn't you turn this in after she died?" "Because she died for finding it." Michael's voice was quiet, his eyes on the bedroom door where Tommy slept. "I needed to understand how deep it went first. Keep Tommy safe. And now? Now they made their move, showed their hand." He pointed to a photo of a man shaking hands with cartel leaders. "State Attorney General Phillips, Sarah found proof he's been facilitating cartel operations across 3 states, using local gangs like the Death Riders as cover." Maria studied the photo. "That's why they sent Daniels to supervise our operation. They needed to control how the Death Riders fell and identify anyone else who knew the truth." Michael's phone buzzed. Cooper with an update. The sheriff had moved the Rodriguez family to a secure location after the attempt to take Tommy. Thunder rolled across the lake, a storm approaching that matched Michael's mood. "How many agents can you absolutely trust?" 6. "All veterans from my old task force. Get them here quietly." Michael began sorting the evidence into piles. "Phillips will have people watching federal channels, local law enforcement, even state police." "What's the play?" "Sarah's way." A small smile touched his lips. "She always said the best operations are the ones your target doesn't know happened until it's too late." Maria made calls while Michael continued organizing the evidence. Each document told part of a story, how Phillips had risen to power by making deals with cartels, using local gangs as distribution networks while maintaining a tough-on-crime public image. The Death Riders had been just one piece of a larger puzzle. "Teams en route," Maria reported. 2 hours out. "But Michael, Phillips has resources we can't match. Private security, corrupt officials at every level. He also has weaknesses." Michael held up a particular file. Sarah found them all. His pride, his need to maintain appearances, his campaign for governor next year. A noise from the bedroom made them both turn. Tommy stood in the doorway, looking small in his borrowed pajamas. "Dad?" His voice trembled slightly. "Are the bad policemen coming back?" Michael crossed the room, kneeling before his son. "No, buddy, never again. But I need you to be brave a little longer, like Mom would want." Tommy's hand went to the compass, still clipped to his belt loop. "Mom always said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared." "That's right." Michael pulled him close. "It means you do what's right anyway." Thunder crashed closer now, rain beginning to pelt the cabin's windows. Maria's phone lit up with updates from her team. Positions of Phillips' security, movements of his corrupt network, all the pieces they'd need. "We'll have one shot at this," she said after Tommy had gone back to bed. "Phillips is speaking at a law enforcement conference tomorrow. Every police chief and federal agent in 3 states will be there." "Perfect." Michael's smile was cold. "Sarah always said the best time to expose corruption is when everyone's watching." They worked through the night as the storm raged outside, planning each detail. Maria's team arrived in 1s and 2s, veterans who'd worked with Sarah and trusted her judgment. Every person in that cabin had lost something to the corruption they fought: partners, careers, faith in the system. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the lake mirror-smooth. Michael stood on the cabin's deck, watching the sun rise. Tomorrow, they would dismantle an empire that had taken decades to build, not with guns or badges, but with truth, Sarah's favorite weapon. His phone buzzed one final time. Cooper with confirmation. Every piece was in place. "Dad?" Tommy joined him. On the deck, Sarah's compass in his hand. "Is it almost over?" Michael looked at his son, seeing Sarah's determination in his eyes. "Almost, buddy. Mum helped us find the way. Now we just have to be brave enough to follow it." The morning light caught the compass's crystal, sending rays of hope across the lake's calm surface. After 5 years of shadows, the truth was finally ready to shine. The Cedar Lake Convention Center buzzed with activity as law enforcement officials from across 3 states gathered for the annual conference. Michael, dressed in a deputy's uniform borrowed from Cooper, watched Attorney General Phillips work. The room from his position near the audio-visual control booth. Security sweep complete. Maria's voice came through his earpiece. All our people are in position. Michael touched his radio twice to acknowledge. Around the room he could spot Maria's trusted agents, each playing their part. Agent Chen managing the registration desk, Rodriguez handling security, all the pieces falling into place. Package is ready, Cooper added over the channel. The sheriff had been instrumental in the plan, his reputation for integrity making him the perfect messenger. Phillips reached the podium, his smile practiced and political as cameras flashed. The Attorney General was in his element, surrounded by the law enforcement community he'd spent years corrupting. Distinguished colleagues, Phillips began, his voice carrying authority and false sincerity. We gather here today to discuss the future of law enforcement in our great states. Michael's hand tightened on the USB drive in his pocket, Sarah's evidence, carefully prepared and verified. 5 years of investigation, of following money trails and connecting dots, all leading to this moment. 10 minutes to broadcast, Maria updated. They'd gained control of the conference's live stream, ready to reach every law enforcement office in 3 states. Phillips continued his speech, touching on his tough-on crime stance, his recent successes, against organizations like the Death Riders. Each word was carefully chosen to maintain his image while sending messages to his corrupt network. Package moving, Cooper announced. Right on cue, an aide hurried to the stage, handing Phillips an envelope. The Attorney General's face showed nothing as he opened it, but Michael caught the slight tension in his shoulders. Inside was a single photo. Phillips meeting with cartel leaders, taken by Sarah 5 years ago. A warning shot. We have movement, Rodriguez reported. His security team is getting nervous. Phillips maintained his composure, but his eyes scanned the room more intently now. Michael could practically see the calculations running behind that political smile. 5 minutes to broadcast, Maria updated. The Attorney General's speech shifted subtly, incorporating warnings about corrupt elements within law enforcement, false accusations that could damage the community. He was adapting, trying to get ahead of whatever he thought was coming. Sir, another aide approached the stage, more urgently this time. More photos, more evidence. Phillips's smile cracked slightly. His people are making calls, Chen reported from the registration desk. Lots of them. Good, Michael replied softly. Let them burn their channels, trying to contain this. Phillips was sweating now, though he maintained his speech. His security detail was moving, trying to identify threats in the crowd, but they were looking for weapons, for physical danger, not understanding that the real threat was information. 2 minutes, Maria announced. Michael moved to his position near the main doors. Around the room, other agents did the same, creating a subtle barrier between Phillips and his escape routes. 1 minute. Phillips was wrapping up his speech, clearly intending to make a quick exit, but Cooper was already moving toward the podium, a final envelope in hand. 30 seconds. The Attorney General's phone buzzed. His face went pale as he read the message. A simple text containing Sarah's final report, detailing every corrupt deal, every cartel connection, every betrayal of the public trust. 10 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, Cooper's voice cut through the room as he reached the podium. There's been a change in program. The screens around the room flickered, then came to life with Sarah's evidence. Bank records, surveillance, photos, recorded conversations, 5 years of corruption exposed in high definition. Phillips lunged for the podium, but Cooper stood firm. Attorney General Phillips, as ranking law enforcement officer present, I am obligated to inform you of your rights. Chaos erupted as Phillips' security team tried to intervene, only to find themselves facing federal agents who'd been waiting. For exactly this moment, the Attorney General himself turned to flee, only to find every exit covered. Signal is broadcasting to all channels, Maria confirmed. Every precinct, every federal office, every news station in 3 states. It's done. Michael watched as Phillips was taken into custody, the man's carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Sarah's evidence was already spreading across secure channels, too many copies in too many hands to be contained. "Dad?" Tommy's voice came through his earpiece. The boy, safe with Carmen Rodriguez, watching the live stream. "Did Mom help catch the bad guys?" Michael smiled, touching the compass he now wore on his own belt. "She sure did, buddy. She showed us the way." The storm that had been gathering for 5 years had finally broken, and in its wake, truth poured down like rain. The convention center erupted into controlled chaos. As Cooper read Phillips his rights, the Attorney General's security team made their final, desperate play. 3 men drew weapons, while others rushed for secondary exits, all following long-established contingency plans. But Michael Stone had spent 5 years learning those plans, understanding every escape route, every fallback position. Zara's investigation hadn't just exposed the corruption, it had mapped out their entire playbook. "East exit blocked," Rodriguez reported over the radio. "2 suspects in custody. West secure," Chen added. "No movement." Phillips himself remained frozen at the podium, his political mask cracking as he watched his empire collapse in real time. On the screens above him, evidence continued to stream. Documents, photos, recorded conversations that implicated not just him, but his entire network. "It's over, Phillips," Cooper said, handcuffs ready. "Don't make this worse." The Attorney General's eyes locked onto Michael, recognition finally dawning. "Stone," he spat. "Sarah's husband. I should have known." "You should have," Michael agreed, moving closer. "Sarah always said corruption leaves patterns. You just have to know where to look." Phillips laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You have no idea what you've done. The people I work for, the cartels." Michael's voice carried across the now silent room. "They're next. Sarah's evidence doesn't just implicate you. It maps their entire operation across 3 states. Every route, every contact, every dirty deal." A commotion at the rear of the hall drew attention. 3 of Phillips' most trusted officials were trying to delete files, destroy phones, eliminate evidence. Maria's team moved to stop them, but the damage control attempt told its own story to the watching law enforcement audience. "Sir!" A young deputy burst into the hall. "The Death Riders, they're being released from federal custody. Orders just came through from—" "Begging your pardon," a new voice interrupted. Razor, leader of the Death Riders, stepped into the hall, but not as a free man. He was in custody, surrounded by federal agents. "But we've decided to cooperate fully with the investigation." Phillips' face went ashen. Michael allowed himself a small smile. "Another thing Sarah taught me. Always have backup plans for your backup plans." The Attorney General's hand moved suddenly, reaching inside his jacket. Michael was already moving, but he wasn't the only one. Cooper, Rodriguez, and 3 other agents converged simultaneously. The gun never cleared Phillips' jacket. 5 sets of hands restrained him, the weapon clattering harmlessly to the floor. As he was secured, Michael noted the make and model, the same type that had killed Sarah 5 years ago. "Multiple suspects fleeing the scene," Maria reported over the radio. "Local PD and state police responding. Roadblocks in place." On the screens, Sarah's evidence continued its relentless exposure. Financial records showed millions in cartel money flowing through seemingly legitimate businesses. Surveillance photos captured meetings between Phillips and known cartel leaders. Phone records, email chains, and bank transfers painted a picture of corruption so vast it seemed impossible to have remained hidden, but Sarah had found it. Piece by piece, she'd assembled the puzzle while maintaining her cover. Even her death had been part of the investigation, a final sacrifice that had kept the evidence safe until the right moment. "We've got movement in the parking structure," Chen warned. "Armed suspects, multiple vehicles." "Let them run," Michael replied. "Every escape route leads to a trap. Sarah mapped them all." Phillips, now thoroughly restrained, looked up at Michael with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. How long? How long have you been planning this? 5 years, 2 months and 13 days. Michael knelt to meet the corrupt official's eyes. Since the morning Sarah didn't come home, she knew they were coming for her, you see. Knew someone had betrayed her investigation. Understanding dawned in Phillips's eyes. The evidence she allegedly found, she leaked it on purpose. Let us think we'd contained it when she died. While I kept the real evidence safe, Michael confirmed. Every file, every photo, every recording. Sarah knew someone high up was compromised. She just didn't know how high. The convention center was now fully secured. Law enforcement officials who'd come to hear a speech were now witnessing the largest corruption bust in state history. Phones rang constantly as the evidence spread through official channels, triggering investigations and arrests across 3 states. Dad? Tommy's voice came through Michael's earpiece again. Is it really over? Michael looked around the hall. Federal agents were processing multiple suspects. Cooper was coordinating with state police to track down fleeing conspirators. Maria's team was securing evidence and beginning preliminary interviews. But more importantly, he saw honest cops stepping up, taking control, determined to clean house. Sarah's evidence hadn't just exposed corruption, it had given good people the proof they needed to fight back. Yeah, buddy, he replied softly. It's over. Mum's case is closed. Can we go fishing tomorrow? Michael smiled, touching the compass. At his belt. Absolutely. The lake's peaceful again. Phillips was led away, his political career and criminal empire in ruins. Around the convention center, similar scenes played out as corrupt officials found themselves trapped by Sarah's meticulous evidence. The carefully constructed network that had taken decades to build had been dismantled in a single morning. Maria approached, her tablet displaying updating arrest numbers. Cartel leadership is running. They're burning their own operations, trying to disappear before the evidence reaches them. Let them run, Michael replied. Sarah's evidence includes their backup plans, their escape routes, even their overseas accounts. The more they run, the more they'll implicate themselves. He looked out the convention center windows toward Cedar Lake, its surface gleaming in the morning sun. The Death Riders were gone, their operation dismantled. Phillips and his corrupt network were finished, their power broken. Even the cartels were running, their carefully hidden influence now exposed to the light. Sarah had shown them the way, her investigation creating the map that led to this moment. She'd understood that corruption, no matter how vast, was vulnerable to truth. All it took was someone brave enough to expose it. Time to go home, buddy, he spoke into his radio. Mom would be proud of us both. The lake would be peaceful now, its waters clean of the corruption that had plagued it. A place where a father and son could fish together, remembering a woman who'd given everything to protect what mattered most. Tomorrow, they would cast their lines into those calm waters. But today, justice rained down like fire, cleansing the lake Sarah had died to protect. Morning mist drifted across Cedar Lake, just like it had that first day when the Death Riders arrived. But now, the only sound breaking the dawn silence was the gentle splash of fishing lines hitting water. A little more to the left, buddy. Michael guided, watching Tommy adjust his cast. Remember what we talked about. Let the line flow naturally. They stood on their familiar dock, rebuilt by the community after the events that had shaken Cedar Lake. The Lake Festival was in full swing behind them, the town celebrating more than just summer's arrival. They were celebrating their freedom, their recovery, their return to peace. Like this, Dad. Tommy's cast was perfect, the line arcing gracefully before settling on the water's surface. Sarah's compass glinted on his belt loop, catching the rising sun. Just like that, your mum would be impressed. Martha's diner was doing brisk business, the morning crowd gathering for her famous festival pancakes. Mr. Chen's liquor store was open again. His arm healed, his smile returned. Even Mrs. Sullivan's ice cream parlor had been restored, Tommy's fishing photo once again hanging proudly on her wall. Agent Torres said they found all the bad guys Mom was looking for, Tommy said, concentrating on his line. Even the ones who ran away. Michael nodded. Maria's team had been thorough, following Sarah's evidence to its every conclusion. The cartel's influence had been broken, their operations exposed and dismantled across 3 states. Phillips and his corrupt network were facing federal charges, their trial dates set. "Your mum always finished what she started," Michael replied. "She just needed a little help at the end. The festival would be different this year. No death riders terrorizing vendors, no corrupt officials collecting bribes. Instead, Cooper had organized a memorial dedication, a small plaque near the lake's edge, honoring a fallen officer who'd sacrificed everything to protect her community. Dad?" Tommy's voice was thoughtful. "Do you think we could put some flowers by Mum's plaque? Maybe plant a garden there, like the one at Ms. Rodriguez's?" Michael smiled, remembering Sarah's love for growing things. "I think she'd like that a lot, buddy." The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Behind them, Cedar Lake was waking up, its people emerging to celebrate their town's rebirth. But here on the dock, father and son had everything they needed: 2 fishing rods, the open water, and the memory of a woman who'd shown them the way home. "Hey, Dad, I think I got something." Michael watched his son handle the rod with confident expertise, Sarah's compass glinting like a star as Tommy brought in his catch. The fish wasn't large, but the boy's smile could have lit up the whole lake. Some things, Michael realized, were worth fighting for. Worth dying for, as Sarah had proven, but more importantly, they were worth living for. These quiet moments, where peace and justice met on a summer morning, where a father and son could fish without fear, where a community could gather in celebration rather than fear. Cedar Lake was healing, and in its calm waters, hope rose with the sun.